So glad you're here tonight. You get extra credit for coming during the storm. And I'm pretty sure if a tornado kills you while you're at church, you get an automatic ticket. So, yeah. We're in Romans chapter 12 tonight. Paul spends the first few chapters of the book explaining how in the world can God save a sinner. Talking about how you can't earn it, but God can credit you with righteousness so you can be saved. And then in chapter 12, he says, therefore, since God has given you grace and saved you and given you a way into heaven, he says, then I urge you to behave a certain way. He says, first of all, offer yourself as a living sacrifice to God. Then in verse 9, he talks how we're supposed to act. As Christians, we are called to a higher standard than everybody else. Christians have to act differently. And then verse 14, he then turns and he says, here's how you are to treat difficult people. We all have difficult people in our lives. Some people are just hard to get along with. But God expects us to try. And he starts right off, bless those who persecute you. In other words, if somebody is mistreating you, what is your normal response?
Mistreat them back.
Mistreat them back. Be ugly, mean. And Paul says, no, as a Christian, you have to make a different choice. If someone is mean to you, you bless them. You be a blessing to them. Bless and do not curse. Now, curse in this context doesn't mean say curse words. It basically means wish bad things on them. Then he says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. What does that mean?
Get along.
Get along. You know, how do you live in harmony with people? What's some of the things that you have to do?
Bite your tongue.
Yes, there is a lot of that. There is a lot of biting your tongue. Proverbs puts it this way. It says, he who overlooks an insult is wise. People are going to say mean things, and we just have to sometimes keep our mouths shut, which is not easy for some of us.
It kind of requires more of you too, because you have to know people a little more to know, in order to know what irritates them.
That's
or what,
true.
You know, to,
Yeah.
in order to avoid
Yeah,
those.
try to avoid irritating people. If you know something really aggravates
know them, you don't know
yeah,
them.
try not to do things that you know are going to make people mad. Don't be proud. What is pride?
What comes before a fall?
Yeah, pride goes before a fall. But what is pride? We know, we use that word all the time, but what does it mean?
It's thinking more highly of yourself.
Okay, thinking more highly of yourself is one element of pride. What else? The Bible talks a great deal about pride. Now, there is a good kind of pride. Be proud of what your children do and so forth. But usually when the Bible talks about pride, it's the bad kind. Pride keeps us from admitting when we're wrong. Most of us don't like to admit that we're wrong. I just can't get my wife to ever admit that she's wrong.
If I ever am, I'll
If you ever are, you'll get right.
He'll be the first to know.
Yeah. Don't be proud. In other words, don't think of yourself more. Don't think you're better than others or smarter than others. He says, be willing to associate with people of low position. Now, that's not quite as big a problem in our culture as it was in that one. Because in those days, you had a huge number of slaves. You had the lower class working people. You had the middle-class worker, the middle-class business owners, you had the soldiers, you had the priests, and everybody was in their little strata of culture. And you basically didn't associate with people above your level or below your level. You kind of stayed in your culture. Theoretically, in America, we're all equal. So, but in practice, how does this work?
Well, Garth Brooks made $1 million off of that.
That's true.
Friends in low
Yes,
places.
he did, friends in low places. But in a practical sense, what does this mean for us as Christians?
This is not like avoiding people that maybe don't have as much or don't look as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. He's saying don't avoid people just because they don't have as much as you've got, or they don't have as much education as you've got, or don't disrespect people. Basically, he's saying treat people, everybody, with respect, with love. You don't necessarily associate with everybody, but you treat everybody as children of God. What's my motivation for this? What's my logic?
Well, Jesus associated with
Well, for one thing, yeah, Jesus associated with
tax collectors.
the sinners and the tax collectors.
Well, because, I mean, if it goes back to, I guess, our attitude in a relationship with God, right? Because if we recognize His sovereignty and we realize what kind of, refuse we are.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
I shouldn't hold,
Yeah.
I am. Then-
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm willing to associate with you. It's not your wife does. I mean,
Yes, wait, not.
yeah. Now, we realize that God is willing to associate with us. Who are we to refuse to associate with somebody else? I mean, the lowest scum on the earth is not as far below us as we are below God. So if God is willing to treat me as a son, as a brother, Jesus calls us brothers, how dare I look down upon anybody? Don't be conceited. What does it mean to be conceited?
Think more of yourself than you should.
Yeah, think more of yourself than you should. Why is that a problem for us?
Some of us are always right.
It's hard for us to not think highly of ourselves. That's just the way we are.
It's harder to think about others if you're so busy thinking so much of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. What's the old saying? It's not all about you. But why do we have such a problem with that?
Because we're
Why is it such an issue? Why does the Bible talk about it so many times?
We're just selfish people.
Okay, for one thing, we're born with a selfish nature. That's part of it. And also, don't we tend to evaluate everything that happens in terms of us? If when I heard that GM was closing the plant, you know what my first thought was? How's this going to affect me? I didn't even work there. Ma'am?
I just said, why would it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just our nature.
Why would it, no, she wants to know, why did you think it would affect you?
Oh, well, I thought it might take half the members of the church and I wouldn't have a job, We tend to evaluate everything and how it's going to affect us. If I hear the news that inflation's going to 12%, my first thought is not, how's that going to affect, David? How's that going to affect me? Because we do live in our own bodies and everything comes out. So that is a natural thing. But Paul is saying, don't let that natural tendency cause you to put yourself above everybody else and make you're the most important thing in the world and so forth. If we can get around ourselves, how do we treat people?
Nicer.
It's not hard to deal with people correctly if we can get by ourselves. But we got to get ourselves out of the way because we tend to think of ourselves first. That's just our nature. When children come into the world, what's the hardest thing to teach them?
Just share.
to share. Yes, it's hard to teach children to share, and we work at it real hard for years and years and years and years. And unfortunately, some people don't learn that as children, and they have to learn it the hard way as they grow up. What's the number one problem in marriage? Selfishness.
Eye problems.
Selfish, yeah, I problem. I, me. If Sharon would just do everything the way I want it done, our marriage would be great. It would be perfect.
You have to go home with me.
I do have to go home and do that. See, it's all about her. So he's giving us instructions. He's saying when you're dealing with difficult people, people that are mean or you don't like or harsh to you, you got to get away from thinking everything about yourself. If somebody is mean to me, as a human, my response is to hurt back. As a Christian, what should go in my mind if someone is harsh, mean, angry, ugly? What should I think as a Christian?
Maybe, did I do something?
First of all, I need to ask, did I do something that caused that? Yes, that's the first question I need to ask. Have I done something to make that person angry? Well, you might not have meant
You might
to,
not.
sir.
And you might not have.
And you might not have, but at least that's where you need to start.
It may not have anything to do with you.
Yeah.
Just,
Or sometimes you say, why is that person so upset? It may not have anything to do with you. They may be upset about something else and then take it out on you. But we don't need to hurt them if they're already hurting for something else. You know, if your neighbor loses his job and then comes home and yells at you, it's got nothing to do with you. He's upset about something else. And so we need to think about things like that and not put everything on ourselves. It's not all about me. Verse 17, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Now this is something the Christian must do. This is something we have to decide. We're just not going to go there. If someone does something that's wrong, that does not give us the license to do something wrong to them. And that's another normal human response. If someone punches me in the nose, I want to punch him in the nose. And Jesus says no.
It's even harder sometimes when somebody does something to someone else in your family.
Yes.
Because you want.
Okay, that's called taking up offenses. Taking up offenses is when somebody else is hurt and you jump to their defense and you take up their offense and get mad at the person who hurt them. Sir?
It's a huge problem today.
Oh, it's a big problem
Politically,
today.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You've got all kinds of people on the internet. that
Oh,
take
yes.
offenses.
Yes.
Well, I know at school, anytime you talk to a parent about something their child has done, some kind
Yes.
of altercation, they never say, oh, well.
What did my child do?
Yeah, no, it's always, what did you do to the other?
Uh-huh.
of the
Yeah.
kid that was involved?
Yes.
So it's just hard.
You know, we take up offenses naturally. If somebody hurts your child, you want to defend your child, and you want to. If you're not careful, you can do something that's not right in offense, taking up somebody else's. We got enough problems keeping our own offenses, much less taking up other people's offenses. So he says, don't go there. Be careful to do what is right in the sight of everybody. Why?
Because we represent Christ.
Because you represent Jesus Christ. When I was a teenager, every time I went out, my mother always said, remember who you are. Remember your family name. Don't embarrass the family. Well, as a Christian, we've got to do the same thing. We've got to realize we don't embarrass the family that we are part of. Many, many years ago, I was a minister in Tennessee. And one day I went to Taco Bell. And Taco Bell has something, the same thing I get every time I go to Taco Bell. a nachos Bel Grande, no sour cream. I hate sour cream. I always say no sour cream. So the waitress took, or the girl at the counter took my order, and she handed it to the guy behind her to make the order. Well, I watched him make it. And he put the chips and the meat and the beans, and then he grabbed that, it looks like a grease gun. And he grabbed the grease gun full of sour cream, went, put a big plot right in the middle of it. And then he looked at the order and he realized it wasn't supposed to have sour cream. Now I'm standing here, no more than 10 feet watching him. So he looked one way or the other. He didn't turn around and look at me. He looked one way or the other. He took a chip and scraped off as much as he could. And then he took some beans and covered up the rest. Well, I got mad. Because I'm paying big bucks for, Taco Bell. So he then covers over the sour cream that's left and turns around and hands it to her. She hands it to me. She had no clue what happened. Well, I was mad. So I just slammed it down, turned, and walked out the door. And I got in my car, and as I started driving off, I thought,
Wait a minute.
I can't act like that. I'm a Christian. I represent the church. I'm a preacher. I have to act better than that. I tell you, being a preacher has helped me a lot of times.
Shouldn't have anything to do with it.
It shouldn't, but fortunately, it has helped. I'll take all the help I can get. So I went and turned around, went back and parked, and went in and apologized to her. She still had no clue what went wrong. But I realized I had to make it right. Now, I wish I could say I've done that every time in my life, but that's the one time I did do the right thing. But we do represent Christ. And if we do something wrong, we have to realize we represent the family. Because what's the main complaint non-Christians have about Christians?
Hypocrites.
They're hypocrites. What do they mean by that?
They say they're all these.
Yeah, they say they're all this goody-goody and they don't act like it. Well, unfortunately, they're right sometimes. And so Paul says, behave like a Christian's supposed to, even when other people don't. Now, this verse 18 is a very important verse. If it is possible. What does that imply?
It may not be possible.
It may not be possible. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, again, what's the implication?
Some things you can't control.
Some people may not want to live at peace, and there's nothing you can do about it. They may want to be mean and nasty and ugly, and there's not a thing. But what's he telling me?
You've got
If
to do your
you
part.
can.
You make your best effort to be nice to people. When Sharon and I first moved to Oklahoma, we lived in a rental house over at the lake, Lake Hefner. And our neighbor was a grouch. If the kids knocked the ball into his yard, he pitched a royal fit. And one day Sharon was out mowing the grass. And he came out and chewed her out because she had the mower turned the wrong way. It was blowing some grass on his yard. And he had special grass, and he didn't want to iron my old cheap grass on his expensive grass. But I had to be nice to him. I wanted to say, you're an old grouch, but I can't do that. And so we promised him from now on, we'll turn the mower the other way when we go back. Yeah, walk over, pick your dandelions and toss them over the fence.
Have all the kids blowing.
Yeah. But he says, as far as it depends on you, you do your best to get along with difficult people. If they won't have it, then what? That's not your problem. God says, as far as it depends on you. I can't go to God and say, well, he's mean. And God says, yeah, but were you mean back? God says, I can't, he has no, you should know better. And we know better. We know how to treat people, and we're supposed to treat them that way. And then he just kind of flatly states it. Do not take revenge. What's revenge?
Getting even.
Getting even. That's a tried and true American way. People deserve, when I get, they ought to, if somebody flips you off driving your car, the tendency is to,
Say, yeah, I'm number one.
yeah. But God says, I don't want you taking revenge. But God, He deserves it. And what's God going to tell me?
Yeah, you're better than that.
God says, you don't have to take revenge.
He's
Why?
got it covered.
God says, I've got it covered. God says, don't take revenge. Leave room for God's wrath. For it's written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay.
I think it's similar to what you're talking about with the conceited thing, about we're so much farther below God.
Yes.
Our offenses against God are far greater
Oh,
than
yeah.
the offense our
Oh,
fellow
yeah.
human
Yeah.
against us.
So God says, there are cases that need revenge. There are cases that deserve punishment. And God says, what? I'll do the punishing. If somebody is so mean and so bad and so horrible that they need to be punished, God says, I'll take care of it. I'll punish them. And God will do a better job than we would anyway. If they need punishment, God's punishment is going to be better than mine. And so we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about revenge. Now, is it revenge to serve on a jury and vote a guy guilty? Why not?
It's your civic duty.
Is it revenge if you're a cop and you have to shoot somebody? No. That's got nothing to do with what he's talking about. He's talking about personal relationships. He's not talking about the law. If somebody robs a bank and shoots at a cop and the cop shoots him back, the cop's doing his job. If the government punishes somebody, that's the government's job. Scripture makes it plain. It's the government's job to have law and order, and people have to be incarcerated, shot, executed. That's just the way it works. That's not revenge. Revenge is when we want to get even ourselves, and that is what God says we don't do.
It's kind of hard to understand, God taking revenge, but when is that?
Well, that's a good question. When does God take revenge? Sometimes He takes revenge in this life. Sometimes people pay the consequences this time. If not, God says, I'll balance the books eventually. It may be in eternity. But God says, I'll do a much better job anyway. Let me handle it. You don't need to worry about it. Besides, bitterness, which is where revenge comes from, is very harmful. We are designed by God as a vessel to hold certain things within us. We are designed by God to hold love and gratitude and caring and joy.
In the Spirit of God.
In the Spirit of God. If you take hydrofluoric acid, for those of you who are chemistry majors, if you take hydrofluoric acid and put it in a glass beaker, guess what will happen? It'll eat it up. You have to store hydrofluoric acid in paraffin. It will not stay in glass. It'll eat it up. We're the same way. God designed us to hold certain things within us. But bitterness and anger and rage and malice, what will that do to us? It eats us up, just like the hydrofluoric acid will eat up glass. I read a book by a Christian psychologist. He had studied with people who were in mental institutions. He said easily 90% of everybody in a mental institution is there because of unresolved guilt or bitterness. So bitterness will destroy you. If you get angry with people and you dream about getting revenge, that's just as bad as doing it, as far as you're concerned. So what does he say do with it? I mean, there are people that deserve it. What do I do with it?
Give it up.
Give it to God. You may have to pray and say, God, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to hand it to you.
morning. Now
Well, the sun's shining now.
it's pouring down, I said.
Pouring down rain.
Yeah.
It's raining in the
emergency
sunshine. Well, it sure is. What's it warning us of?
Tornado.
Oh, tornado, good.
Yeah.
It's a
Take
warning
shelter
too, I don't know where it's at.
Last
Take
time we
shelter
did
in the
that-
basement. We're in the basement.
We're in the
all right.
basement.
Last
We're
time we
good.
did that, it was
We're already good.
not even close. It was like-
Carry,
Probably.
carry on.
Carry on.
Did it show there?
All right, so in this life, people are going to do things that hurt us, hurt people we love, and we think they deserve to be hurt back, and they may deserve it. But God says, you don't have to worry about it. Let me take care of it. And that just takes the burden off our shoulders. We don't have to worry. We don't have to get angry. We don't have to get bitter. What does anger do for you if you have it long enough? Again, it gives you ulcers and makes you sick. I can't eat.
You never feel good when you're angry.
You know, Sharon and I have about one squabble a year. That's about all that I can stand. And when I get angry with her, I can't eat. I can't sleep. You know, even if I have steak, it tastes like cardboard. So it's just not worth getting mad.
Imagine I get steak.
If you're mad, I'm making steak anyway. Get a grilled cheese sandwich if I'm lucky, yeah. And so God is saying, let me handle the getting even with people. Besides, if I have done something to someone else that deserves punishment, what do I want? If I have hurt you, what do I want? Yeah, I want you to forgive me. I want God to forgive me. So if you hurt me, what should I? See, we want people to overlook our faults and understand our problems, but we're not quite as generous with them. So, yes, ma'am?
The tornado sirens are going outside.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
in
it's
general, it's
Oklahoma
safer to
City
be
warning.
on around the corner.
It said, at Tinker.
I think, or
Oh, yeah.
This one off at Tinker?
It's 5 after anyway.
It's 5 after anyway. Okay. Well, we'll call it a night then.
take cover now. It says-
Ma'am?
It says take cover now.
Take cover now.
Move to,
Last time we did that,
and